Hey there, hope you're doing well. In this podcast, let's talk about what doing thing at scale means, right? So we're not talking, we don't want to be talking performance and scalability, so not that. But we're going to talk about how you should actually do things at scale from a slightly different perspective. Let's see what this means, right? Let me take an example, almost an arbitrary example, but I think it will set a good foundation for this monologue or conversation, if you will. Say you need to go from point A to point B, right? So we live about like a mile or so from Harris Teeter, the grocery, or say Wegmans is a few miles away. If let's say my intent is to go from my house to Wegmans, I could bike there, like use my bicycle and actually get there, right? It's between a mile and 5 miles or whatever, so you can get there comfortably. So let's say this is my requirement, being able to go from this neighborhood, this house or a house in this neighborhood to Wegmans. I'm supposed to come up with a solution, and I might say, hey, let's just build a bicycle because it's going to solve the problem, right? Perfect. So we try it out, we do a prototype, we take the bike or the bicycle, ride it, and everything is great. We're able to grab a can of milk. We come back home, we're like, this is awesome. Things work fine. We found the solution to our problem, and now we need to do it, solve it for the entire neighborhood. So let's say there are 100 homes here, so we're going to order or make 100 bikes and then sell it, and everyone's happy. They're happy till a certain point of time, right? Let's say Wegmans decides to relocate, move out of their current location and move 5 miles further away. We could still probably manage. It's a bit of a pain. It's twice the distance, so your time is increased by 100%. But people may not be entirely pissed, right? So you're still fine with using the bicycle. Now imagine if that same Wegmans had decided to relocate one more time to 20 miles away or 30 miles away, and so there comes a point where commuting by a bike is not a solution anymore. I mean, unless you're one of those Tour de France type of bikers who can bike hundreds of miles, but you get the idea, right? So it just doesn't work, it doesn't scale. So this solution that we had built, architected, designed, and implemented was good to a certain point, till a certain point of time. Maybe we didn't understand the requirements well enough. Maybe we didn't plan for the requirements changing. Maybe we didn't plan for other things happening outside of our control, that we had we see ourselves in a very precarious position, so to speak, right? So let's take that. I don't think it's a bad example actually, right? So what does doing things at scale mean? Now, if you took that as an example, say business came to you and said, hey, Krish, I need to go from point A to point B, from this neighborhood to Wegmans, build something for me. Before maybe I start off trying to, build a bike, check it out, things work, you do a prototype, and then you have this conversation around, hey, what if things change? What if Wegmans relocated? Would that be this solution it wouldn't work, it wouldn't scale. So do we need to worry about it, or do we not need to worry about it, right? You need to pop these questions. Again, this is a pretty random example, but you're going to have to draw the lines and to see what it means, but hopefully you get the point. So I think that's sometimes more often than not lost in translation, where we absorb requirements as is coming from product or business, and as an engineering team don't necessarily think through. Business comes to us because they spend time researching the market, understanding the needs, and they come to us. You can't call it, it's not like business does certain things, engineering does one, marketing does the other, support does something else. Yeah, sure, our roles are separated, but the success or failure of a company or an organization or a product depends on all of us, right? So the responsibility is on each of us to actually ask these questions. Bring them up, bring them to the table, and then see if it makes sense. If it does, great. If not, that's fine. We'll move on to the next question. So doing things at scale. So in this example, you may have needed a bike or a moped or like a car or some vehicle that can actually continue to work regardless of where how the locations change. And also there's other things like, what if it rains? What if it's snowing? Could you have used your bike to get to the Wegmans even though it were only 1 or 2 or 3 miles away? Probably not, right? So these are questions. Now, what does scale mean here, right? Hopefully I can connect these because they're clearly related, but hopefully I'm able to articulate that relationship. Let me take a completely mutually exclusive different example now, just to make things more harder on, just to make things a little bit more difficult, and let's see if we can come up with arrive at a conclusion here, right? Say we were implementing a caching layer for a mobile app a little while ago. We took one screen and implemented caching with one endpoint or a set of endpoints. It worked fine. And then we went to the next page or went to the next screen or maybe added more endpoints, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then we soon realized that the design that we were thinking about wouldn't actually necessarily work when we had to extend that to like 650 some endpoints that we actually have in production for Snowpal right now. So we had to take a completely different approach, a new design pattern, a different design pattern, something that will actually help us scale our design to a large number of endpoints. Similarly, let me take a third example. A lot of times when you're running tests, whether it's tests, regardless of what your stack is, it can take, I've seen lots of places where it takes about 2 to 3 minutes, right? Maybe 2, maybe sometimes even more, to actually run a test. You're not running the entire suite, obviously. You're not even running all the tests in that particular spec. You're just running one of them, but for the dependencies to load, it takes that much time. So you're waiting there for 2 minutes twiddling your thumbs. This works if you're only going to write 2, 3, 5 lines of code. If you're writing 50, 100, 500, 1,000 lines of code a day, it just doesn't work because you're going to have to test frequently enough. And if you have to wait 2 minutes every time you wrote 5 lines of code, that model just doesn't scale, right? So now you have to come up with a way to be able to test your changes in small, in an iterative manner, just 5 lines of code, 10 lines of code. Within, say, after you write the 5th line of code and you're ready to test it, it should take maybe 5 seconds tops to be able to test your changes. Whether you hit a button manually or whether the button auto kicks itself off because it's watching your changes, however you want it should be done. But you want for the test to execute within 5 seconds and reinforce whether, hey Krish, it works or it doesn't work, so you can go back and make the code changes. If you have to wait 2 minutes every time you have to do that, you're naturally as a developer going to write more code and test less frequently, which means you would have written 50 or 100 lines of code before you hit run. And if something broke, you will now have to figure out whether it's the first line, second line, 5th line, or the 100th line, right? It just doesn't make you as productive as you actually should be. So that's an example of scaling from a dev standpoint. Let's talk about scalability from your machine standpoint. Like, sometimes you say, unless you're doing all of your work out there in the cloud, like using GitHub code spaces or something, and I actually did a podcast on that recently, please feel free to check it out. You're doing a lot of development on your machine, and if you're doing web, mobile, API, you're running a number of things, right? In my case, I have like 11 or 12 desktops with a number of processes running because I don't want to kill one, start the other. I want to be able to make some mobile changes, then switch to web, then make some API code changes, then maybe do some deployment, run some queries on Mongo. You don't want to. You need a machine that's powerful enough to support all of this, right? So what does scale mean there? If when I do it on my laptop, it works mostly fine. I have an M1 machine, but it's not the same as when I do it on my studio, right? It's just a more powerful machine, which means I don't ever have to kill anything, don't have to restart it for several weeks, and things continue to work. So I'm not wasting time restarting, setting these desktops up, and getting all the processes up and running for me to be able to be productive. So anytime I come and go to my machine, I can actually write mobile code, web code, API code, middleware, backend, create, my Final Cut Pro is running most of the time. That's probably the only thing I maybe even kill. So I can do a lot of this without waiting for anything to start up, which means it lets me do things at scale, even as a machine's, compute power standpoint, right? So scalability as an engineer, as a dev team, is not limited to the scalability of your performance and scalability of your applications in production. It also very much has to do with you and your team or an organization as a habit, as the paradigms of your org as to, hey, how do we do things, whatever it is that we do, how are we able to do it at scale? And what kind of changes do we need to do? Like, for instance, one of the things we do is create videos, animated videos and other videos for our campaigns, ad campaigns. I initially talked to a company that was going to charge us like $400 to $500 per video. Now again, we could have afforded a few videos, but we can't afford hundreds of them that we have today. It'd be a lot of money, which means the idea to have it done through somebody else, with the turnaround time of 2 weeks or so, and the price at being $500 a piece, would not have scaled for us as we need to do a lot more. So we resorted to taking an alternate approach where we end up doing it ourselves. Maybe it's not perfect, nothing is perfect in life, and we don't want to let the perfect come in the way of the good. It serves the purpose, and then we're just fine, right? We want the product to do 90% of the job in making the impression on you as the user. The advertising is probably 10%, right? Maybe lesser. We'll see how it goes. So that's an example of how your cost and your spending needs to be scalable as well. I mean, I could keep going on, and I've seen this on a daily basis. So before you come to a decision, arrive at a design pattern or a methodology, and then start proposing and socializing it with your team, hey, this is how I think we should do it. Make sure that it can actually scale, because the silliest of solutions tends to work most of the time if you're doing fewer numbers. But as the numbers increase, then things get much more complicated, right? So that's if you forgot everything, if none of the rest of what I've said here made any sense to you, just go with that one takeaway, that whatever it is that you establish to yourself, to your team, and to your company, make sure that it scales and is able to stand the test of time, right? Hope that makes sense. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.